Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who has been doomed ever since he lost the ability to love.
Long ago. I was hoping you would pick something from the end.
Yeah.
That man, the dialogue between those two.
It's absurd.
Amazing.
In the most amazing, absurd way that only... I mean, this game is so heightened that way that all the dialogue between people is just... I mean, it's gothic, right? I mean, it fits.
Melodrama.
But it's also... It also feels like it comes through that Japanese lens at the same time, where it's not quite right. It's a little bit too much or something. I don't know.
It's through a lens. Yeah. And
sure.
We haven't talked about this yet, but and it's really not. We don't have to dwell on it too long. But by the way, we're talking about Castlevania Symphony of the Night.
Yeah, we should probably say that.
This is our fourth and final episode.
Yes.
Of the series, that we'll do a bonus episode. And we are both sitting next to each other in an awkward, sitting at a counter with a microphone between us.
Yep.
Doing this live.
Live.
Not live, but in person.
Just as live as
in
we all
person.
do it. But yes, in person.
But anyway, I was about to say, we don't talk about this very often on the podcast, but the localization of this game... Right, it's of an era where
very much
definitely some balls were dropped here and there, and some of the earliest memes on the internet were related to localization.
That's true.
That's true. Essentially errors, right? Like all your base are belong to us, and that kind of stuff. Right?
Master of unlocking.
Yeah, and that was
evil or whatever.
Yeah. That was years ago.
Yeah.
And so always good fun.
This one too, though, I think has at least one that I see from time to time.
Like a famous one.
Yeah, a famous meme.
It might. But yeah, there's that filter. So it's like you have the cultural filter of like, oh, here's these themes. Here's that a different culture is trying to represent Transylvania or
right.
what have you, or Dracula or vampires, right? It's a sort of an Eastern look at that. But then you also have localization as well.
Right.
So it's like, the original script that they wrote for themselves might have been fine. It might have totally nailed the melodrama, and you're like, oh, I get it. Yeah, it's right on. But then you put it through that, again, okay, somebody has to translate it. Is a whole different ballgame. So, and that goes both ways, I'm sure. So,
I'm sure it does. Although, I mean, one of the things that happens coming from Japanese is that there's limitations. You can say a lot more with fewer characters in Japanese because it's an ideogram-based language, right? And so, which also means there's a lot more room for interpretation as well from ideograms, which is maybe part of the translation problem.
Yeah.
But it also means that per character, you can say a lot more, and so they say things more efficiently in a way in Japanese, right? So you also have that problem where they might be saying 6 times as much as we see on the screen, and they're trying to shoehorn it into the space that they had. Because we ran into that actually with even Starfighter. I seem to remember, because we didn't double wide all the strings, we had to fit it into a special format called Shift JIS, I think, is like an ASCII-based format where you can fit a certain number of characters into it, right? 255.
Whoa.
8 bits, right?
I don't remember any of this.
Yeah. You probably didn't have to deal with it. The engineers had to deal with it. And we had a partner over in Japan that actually did the localization and did that. But that's why you only get 7 or 8 characters for a name in Japanese games for the save game, is that almost any Japanese name is going to be 2 to 4 ideograms. Right. Whereas here, you're out of room.
Well, yeah, and I think the thing that it's funny. I didn't intend for this topic to be as big, but it actually is a good example of this topic, and we should have talked about it much sooner, and because we play plenty of Japanese games. But the thing that people don't always realize, and especially at this era, and there was a lot of evolution going on in localization, is people who write for localization companies are writers. Like it's like poetry being translated from another language. You have to kind of be a poet as well, because you are you're interpreting, right? You are having to figure. Sometimes the exact word is not the same word, even in Italian, right? So you have to kind of have a feel for it. Translation of the same Cyrano de Bergerac, and from 3 different translators, there's different lines being spoken.
Vastly different, often.
And some are better than others. Yeah. So it's like local...
Or just more appropriate to a time. You know?
Yeah.
Douglas Hofstadter, who's a professor of computer science and kind of a big thinker in cognitive science as far as computers go, has written a book called Un tombeau de Marot, which is a short poem in French. And he spends like 500 pages talking about the difficulties translating this like 12-line poem, whatever it is, and how many different ways you can interpret it.
Yeah, exactly.
And why it makes it such a difficult test case for computer translation. It's like, how do you do that? Right?
Yeah.
It's super interesting because of those things. It's like how much context is involved. He gives tons of translations of individual lines of this one poem.
It's a creative process, just like anything. And same for this, right? It's like someone's getting Dracula's lines, and they have to kind of be a writer, right? They have to be their own writer, say, what would be a Gothic cool thing in English that Dracula would say, right? Dracula definitely would say sarcasm. Sarcasm. Like, ... It's like, I could not believe it. It's so funny. I'm nodding a lot, even though usually when we're distant, I would say, just so you know that I'm responding to what you're saying. But now I'm nodding, and the audience obviously isn't seeing that. I also got a Siskel and Ebert vibe of what we're doing right now, which won't be a reference from most of our audience, but it's like, we're talking about a thing, and we're sitting right
Siskel.
next to... Yes. I clearly am Siskel. Thanks very much. A reference for the kids out there, everybody.
Save us the aisle seat, everyone.
Anyway, so that ending script is something else.
Yeah, it really is.
And localization only makes it better.
Exactly.
For the fun part of it. So.
And it's wild because we actually, this evening, just before recording, we went and actually saw the other ending. And how silly that is. Like, what a silly reward you get. And it reminded me of Metroid and how you get progressively more of Samus the faster, I guess, you play the game and get to the end, right? That's what it is. It's a time-based thing. Here it's a completion-based thing, and you either have Maria not follow Alucard, or to follow him as if he's her one true love or something. I don't really know. She's trying to save him.
I mean, it's for me. It comes out as a trophy almost, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I think for the player, which is again, of the era, and we're still not good at dealing with that stuff even today. So and the thing is I guess the Metroid example we had always heard about because it's a bit legendary because it had the added extra thing of a lot of people didn't even realize that Samus was a woman.
Right.
But in here, like, we had no idea there was another ending, right?
Right, true.
I accidentally found it when I was looking up the script for the ending because I wanted to reread the ending.
The silliness of the ending,
So there's technically four endings then, I guess, right?
Right.
There's the two Kill Richter endings.
Yes.
Apparently there's one with the glasses and one without.
Right. That's what you said.
Which I had accidentally gotten both, didn't realize the voice lines were different. It didn't dawn on me. And then the two for
and they aren't so different, right? No. I mean, and the animations I think are the same. Besides, maybe she stays there. Maybe it fades away with the two of them in the foreground. I don't remember. Yeah.
But I mean, that's a bit of a segue to kind of the biggest chunk for this particular episode is we both fully obviously played the game, but most of the time, all the time, we spent in the sort of anti-world.
Yeah, the upside down, as you keep calling it.
Yeah, I keep slipping.
The inverted castle. Don't have them sue us.
Yeah, right, exactly. You got to edit that out. And so I was stuck for sure. I had the glasses and I was like, what's going on? I figured like Richter would turn into something different because I had the glasses on now. Oh, he's going to be Dracula, and like that's the thing. I just didn't see the ball, and then eventually kind of dawned on me like, wait, is that ball something? And then I took the glasses off, came back in, and then the ball's not there. So, okay, so that was it. But then, and this is what I think Alex, who was referring to, of course, and a young Alex Neuse who loves these games playing this game at the time, I can only imagine
his mind being blown. Yeah.
Amazing, yeah. And in fact, anyone. And as you've noted, the popularity of us playing this particular game is clear because of the sort of responses we get,
right.
and
we get a lot
the
more
interest.
Email, yeah.
And I can see why this game is amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, and I actually feel bad that I haven't played it before now.
Oh, I do too. I mean, I had
travesty.
Back in the day, I knew that this was one of those games that a lot of people had played, and I'm surprised that I didn't. I don't know if it was hard to find at the time because I had a PS2 and I played several PS1 games at that time. Final Fantasy IX had just come out, so that was pretty recent, and I played Tactics, I think, and like a Tomb Raider or something, but it was mostly, I think, just stuff I borrowed from friends.
I know why I didn't.
Oh.
I actually remember when people were pushing... Well, people were pushing it, right, because it was 97, Tomb Raider was 96, right? So it was like Tomb Raider was a previous year, and I had this dumb bias because it was a 2D pixel-based game. I was like, oh no.
3D.
No, I've moved on.
I'm a fully three-dimensional
Why would I
now.
play a 2D game on a PlayStation, right?
Wow.
Yeah, no, it's totally dumb. I'm embarrassed about it.
And you should be.
And I should be now playing it. It is an astounding game. And I think the podcast...
So you must have drunk the Kool-Aid at LucasArts when they went 3D.
Oh, I totally did. Yeah. I mean...
Because at the time, I remember not feeling that way. Like, I felt that was a stupid decision. Really.
Like with the adventure games.
Just a pointless... like, why would you do that? You have this really good tool set, and people really enjoy these particular games that we make. Why would you do that?
Right.
It happened before I got there, but yeah.
It makes sense for the adventure games specifically. I get you there. Yeah. I mean... but we've talked about this on other series, I think. It was the industry was going through it, right?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
3D was a thing, It's like... I mean, VR is not maybe as big, but, there's the evangelists, right? And it's the new hotness, and so you go for it. I'm not justifying it. Yeah. I'm not defending it, but
it was at the time a huge headline grabber too, though. A company goes 3D. I mean, when LucasArts was like, we're going to be 3D only from here on out, that was a huge deal.
Yeah,
that was Dylan going electric.
It was a declaration at the company, and in retrospect, I agree with you that it was a weird declaration.
Yeah.
It didn't.
Because Grim Fandango was technically 3D, but effectively 2D.
Well, that's the thing. Is
right?
It really is a 2D game.
Yeah.
But it's like, 3D. Okay,
3D characters.
Got it. Yeah, but kind of unnecessary is what you're saying. Yeah, but I think the podcast for me has really rekindled my love for 2D games. Because I think before the podcast, just because of our jobs and our daily work, I just always feel obligated to keep playing the most recent stuff, right?
Sure.
Which in our space, well, my space right now, you've been doing more variety of things. I have to play like the highest res stuff, right, and the biggest like photoreal, blah blah blah.
Yeah. And
so that kind of unfortunately pushes me away, I think, from that stuff. But we've had to play 2D stuff on the podcast, which has been great because it just reminds me that they're just as great.
Yeah.
Right. And Alex is probably yelling at the at the speakers right now too. So and I have to confess too that Alex.
While we're talking about Alex,
just while I think we can stop talking about Alex after this, but he called me out on an error in naming because last week I was talking about the end boss of Metroid, Ripley, as I said, which it is.
Believe it or not.
Yeah, Well, I have a reason why, though. But it's Ridley is the correct name. So thank you, Alex, for texting me literally right after you listened to the podcast and scolding me. So I'm embarrassed to say I messed it up. That is an error that I've had since I was younger playing Metroids back in the day, and when I had originally read it. It was during the Aliens Alien sort of era, and I just had transcribed it to Ripley.
I'm not surprised.
And I had memorized it that way.
Yeah.
And I've been using Ripley ever since, and then people always correct me, so it's only appropriate that Alex would correct me.
And yet you still call me DeVille. So there we have it. I see where I am. See, Alex? He likes you better. Let's move on to more about the inverted castle and stuff like that, because it's not something we've talked about really at all, because other than me saying that was what was going to happen. Yeah. So you were pretty surprised how much there was of that.
Yeah, I was like, and we were talking just as you were playing, as I was watching you play right before we started recording, that it's fully symmetrical in every way, which so I heard, okay, inverted castle, cool, they're going to do that. It's going to be maybe another quarter or a third of the game. No, it's literally the whole freaking castle with new enemy placements, new enemy designs. Yes. In fact, there are no enemies that show up.
Only
in both.
The bosses.
The bosses that they use as enemies, right? Like
Gambriel,
Minotaur, and
the Minotaur, the werewolf.
But otherwise, the minion enemies, they're all new.
Right.
And in fact, one of my favorites, just to give a specific example and then move on. Remember, there's that one grand staircase section that goes up and up and up and up, and there's knights that slide down it and these fire things. But then on the other side, upside down, there's these enemies that have these contraptions with like wheels that are clinging to the stairs upside down.
They're shooting
and there's like
down
a lady in the contraption.
Right.
It's crazy.
It's like a tram or something.
Yeah.
It's a weird
clinging
thing.
to the ceiling.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's really good.
And
there's a ton of imps in there, and they will grab you and hold you in place.
It's a nightmare section.
Yeah, it's a pretty tough section.
And the upside down gets a lot harder too.
Yes.
Even though you're pretty leveled up, they do the enemy combos. They definitely don't hold back on.
Oh no, they do not. There's a lot of places where there's just a lot going on, and it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
Frequently, and the bosses are tougher, much tougher.
Yeah.
Some of them are really tough.
I didn't finish the big guy.
Right, big guy.
What's that one's name?
I've already forgotten his name. It's Galamoth, I believe, something like that.
Yeah,
I think that's right.
Anyway, yeah. So I could not believe as I kept playing and playing and playing and playing, and I thought for some reason, I think it's just obviously literally because it was just upside down and I couldn't really like translate it. I thought there were some differences between certain things because like. I would imagine that just certain areas wouldn't work if they were upside down or things like that. But you're saying that it's pretty much the same.
I literally took screenshots of the maps when I was streaming the other day.
Yeah.
So it was all set up to stream, and then afterwards I just went in and went back and forth and clipped them, and then rotated.
And it's the same.
It's exactly the same.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, like I can't. This is a mind-blowing thing.
It really is.
Of the era, of the genre.
I mean, it was less of a surprise to me because I played, I guess, Harmony of Dissonance, which has a similar...
Yeah, you said this is a thing.
It's a thing. It's a thing in the 2D ones, I think, on the handhelds as well. So, I mean, I remember that in Harmony of Dissonance. I don't think it's exactly the same, but I feel like there's another castle in the same way. Like, you don't actually fight Dracula.
Yeah, right.
It might turn it upside down. It's so long since I played.
Or they have some big, like... sea change of some kind.
Exactly.
It's like, whoa, the big surprise.
Right. Yeah. And I can't remember if it's the same or just similar. But yeah.
Yeah, it's just like it's astounding.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the fact that they pulled it off too, right? It's like, and I was telling Brett before before when we were playing, which we won't get to do because we just really have a hard time getting guests from overseas on the cast, so we won't know, and I still might try.
Time, translation, and cultural differences make it difficult.
Yeah, it's just really hard, despite my best efforts. But so we'll never know the answer to this, or maybe there's articles or interviews that they've written about this because it's such a classic game. But I'd love to know the development process of that decision, both from a level design perspective as well as enemy placement perspective. And of course, and as you mentioned, there could be tools or other things they could have done to make it easier on themselves. But if you do want it to stay symmetrical, you change one side, for whatever reason, even fixing a bug.
Yeah.
You have to change the other side. And I feel like I can't think of a good example. It might be Indiana Jones, the Infernal Machine or something like that. There's been times when mirroring something is something that I've been involved with or that other games have dealt with that I've been around.
Right.
And it's always a nightmare, to deal with it. And you can always be smarter and more clever about how to deal with the challenge, but on this scale...
Yeah, this is enormous.
Yeah.
I mean, there's even some behavior stuff to be mindful of, like they've turned over the water, but it still slows you down in it, but gravity has you fall out of the water in this because the water sticks to the ceiling, which is just kind of weird. Yeah. But I mean, I was
cool.
remarking it's neat. Yeah, it's totally. I was remarking that it's cool that the splashes still come. They come away from the water and they splash down, but it doesn't make any sense because the water's up. Like, what is that? How does that work? So there's a lot of weirdness there, but it's an interesting weirdness, and the behavior of Alucard in that section is also interesting in terms of like he jumps up there and all that stuff. Yeah, it's just neat. Yeah, it's neat.
Yeah, it's and I think watching you play, because Brett finally got to 200% as we were watching, and he was kind of trying to find some of those last sections, and I mean, we don't have to get off of the Upside Down Castle, but as a little bit of a segue, the ease at which you can transform now that the castle is upside down, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like it's really valuable to. You just feel so badass by this point in the game because you have all the forms and and they're on the shoulder buttons, which when I'd seen that in the manual, I was like, why do they put them on the shoulder buttons? That's kind of, but it's just so elegant, and you're just quickly switching sometimes between the mist and the bat, back and forth.
Yeah, I've done that a number of times.
And you can just like ascend, right? And all these areas before where you were essentially falling when it was the right side up and stuff, and so they went well together, the pacing of things. But yeah, and then the bosses, right? And the bosses in the Upside Down version were all placed in the same places that the other bosses were. Is that true?
I think that's mostly true because there are a lot of them were. There are some that aren't. There are some I think that are just purely additional because I feel like there's more in the inverted castle.
It does feel like there's more. Yeah.
But then there's a spot I think that there isn't one, which is where you fight the werewolf and the minotaur in the right side up castle.
The Colosseum.
Yeah, the Colosseum.
And then where you meet the duo. What's the duo? The bat guy and the
Slagra and Gal.
That room didn't have one either in the Upside Down.
Yeah.
It was just a room. Yeah. But for the most part, there's a sense of say the right side up version very well, or you fairly well, and you're kind of building up to these rooms, and what's what's going to be in there, and then they don't disappoint. Yeah. The bosses are just incredible.
Yeah, the Legion.
That was on the Upside Down.
I want to say yes, but no, I could be wrong about that.
Yeah. Or Beelzebub, or was that
Beelzebub is definitely in the Upside Down.
That one definitely was.
Lord of the Flies.
Yeah. I mean, they just pull out all the stops with these bosses. I'm looking at a list right now, just to refresh my memory, because there's so many of them. Galamoth.
That's the super tall one.
The super
He's
tall one.
like 4 stories, and apparently his head is has no defense, but it's very difficult to get to his head.
I figured that. I couldn't do it.
It's very difficult to get there.
I didn't beat him. I played him a lot. But I didn't beat him. But you showed me the relic you get for it. So, yeah. And then there's the relics.
Yeah.
I mean, the mutators of that. Well, I mean, largely they just power you up for the most part. You don't really turn them on and off, other than the familiars. But, yeah. I mean, just the depth in the Upside Down alone, just crazy.
Yeah, you do feel. I mean, one of the things you were saying is you feel so tough when you're just switching in between these modes. It feels so comfortable. Mm-hmm. It just feels like you start to feel like you're the person with those powers, that you're just so naturally just doing it. Just I need to get up higher, and I do the gravity boots, and then I switch when I'm at the apex, maybe, or and it's just so fluid and natural. I'll switch to the mist because I don't want to deal with something, and then I'll switch to the bat because it climbs faster. Mm-hmm. Or it seems to climb faster. I don't know if that's actually true, or if that's just my brain. It's flapping, so it's moving more. So maybe it just feels like it. But I don't know. It's great stuff. It really is.
Well, I mean, I don't know. Do you know if this is Alucard's? This isn't Alucard's first one, right? First game.
No, I think he was in the Dracula X or whatever that was on the TurboGrafx, so the PC Engine, as it's called other places. But that wasn't here. That wasn't released in North America.
Because this character, because of the transformations and kind of like, because he's part vampire, I guess, right? Half vampire.
He's half vampire. He's the son of
human. Yeah, son of Dracula. So you get a sense like it's just a great character because you can be Dracula but be a hero. Right, so you can transform like Dracula can transform. It's like, oh, he's your dad.
Or an aura.
Or an aura? What do you mean?
Well, Alucard is Dracula, the hero backwards.
Right. That's good. I didn't follow. That was quick. It was too quick for me.
Yeah.
So Dracula's an aura. That's what you're saying? Yeah. Got it. Good one.
Thank you.
Yeah, but it's just...
his first one was Castlevania 3, so there you go.
So we
actually the series that's on Netflix is based on that.
3.
I believe it's based on Castlevania.
So I wonder if
somebody wrote that in.
People are also yelling at us now, but I wonder if there's transformations in 3 then.
I don't know.
This is just a franchise that we're blind.
We're completely unaware.
I'm sorry, we didn't do our research. We didn't play all the games. We don't know. We're completely new to it, But then, I mean, the other thing that I think the Upside Down really pushes heavily is, and especially because you feel so powered up, is just the RPG elements as well. Like you have so many options at that point of things you can do. Both in buffs, but also just the weapons and the armaments and everything.
Or even the familiars and which ones you want to choose to level.
Yep.
You didn't get the sword one. There's a sword that flies alongside you.
Yeah, there's one space that's near the familiars, which I assumed was another familiar.
That's the sword, yeah.
So what is it? Just attack stuff or whatever?
Yeah, just attack stuff. But it's a pretty... It's like the Matsume or whatever. It's that legendary sword or whatever that's in a lot of games.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, the familiars, we used them, but we didn't kind of like...
Or Murasaka, or I can't remember now.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, there's a blade name that's in tons of Japanese video games.
Oh, okay.
And it's named for the famous Japanese swordsman, I believe. So it's like Murasaka or Murasaki or something like that. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, something like the fairy that essentially is sort of like your protector and uses things you may or may not want her to use.
Right.
But does have the sort of, I guess it's the golden apple that resurrects you after you die with full health, and so that's pretty valuable. But, I mean, the depth of systems is just crazy when you think about the spells, which neither of us really used.
Muramasa, that's it.
Yeah, that does ring a bell.
Yeah, Muramasa, that's what I was reaching for, and I could not find it.
And then each familiar having kind of a little bit of its own identity and its own thing that it does, including some kind of lock and key things, like with the I accidentally found the demon, that flicks that switch.
Flicks that switch, yeah.
And that's probably the only one, right, that it does that with?
It does it in both places, but yes.
Yeah, both places.
Right. Those are mirrored, right? I mean, that was the funny thing is that I realized that tonight. That was the last thing I had to go and find was that spot of like, oh, that's right. I never went back and got that.
Right. And then I used the bat mainly, but it was basically just kind of a good long range attack because it swoops across the screen and takes stuff out. And I think the ghost skull basically kind of grapples things, like it attaches itself to enemies.
Oh, it holds them?
And it kind of holds them, and I think it might be doing damage as well, but I think if you hit it while it's attached, then you do extra... I don't know. Yeah. So I couldn't quite figure it out, but I dabbled with all 4 of them to some degree. But there's just too much. I mean, there's just, there's things that, I mean, it's definitely that kind of game that you can see people just devoting themselves to.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's almost like a JRPG in that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's the sort of game that you definitely can see challenging yourself to play in different ways. Like this game, I'm only going to use this sub-weapon or whatever, because that's another thing we haven't gone into a ton, although that's kind of a mainstay of the series, but there's so many of them.
Yeah.
And I love that there's a gallery of them right before the final boss. You can just go pick the one that you like, and use it there. And that's also fun. I mean, I always use the same one, basically, and I was always annoyed when I accidentally picked it up. Like in the clockwork area, there's a ton of them just kind of in breakable fires or candles or lamps or whatever.
Yeah. We had said, I think, last episode that they had solved that problem with the selection of these, but they didn't completely.
Not
because they fade out. Right. So it's like
they flash and disappear. Yeah.
They flash and disappear. They fall off the screen. Like who knows where they go? Sometimes you're like, So
or you don't notice because you're busy fighting something, and then you look and you're like, well, how did I get that diamond necklace thing that I hate?
Yeah, or the hand that just drops like salt on the ground or something.
Oh, I never even used that one.
I think it damages enemies if they walk across it, but it's just
okay. So it's salt.
Yeah, salt.
Okay, it salts the earth. Yeah, right. Okay. It's a circle of protection of salt.
I guess. Yeah, but I didn't feel that useful. But they just unlike Metroid, that I think is a more tightly wound clock when it comes to almost like the cadence that you will get stuff and then what it expands as your capabilities over the course of the game, and kind of is just very paced out very well. And I think the pacing of this game is generally good too, but the multiplying effect with everything that you get in this game over the course of it is just way more.
Right.
And I had potentially controversially said in pre-show to Brett that I think the bosses in this game are way better than Metroid bosses.
Yeah.
I think overall, some bosses are pretty simple, right, and not that intentionally not that sort of complicated. So that's probably very intentional, but I think overall, maybe some of it's variety and just sheer number, is what I'm so impressed by. But still, the variety is crazy.
I was gonna say they're a lot different, and they of course they have varying scales, and they go from your size to very large.
Yeah.
Especially with Galamoth or Legion, whatever that one's called.
And then Beelzebub as well. So they kind of use that. They use that same technology of having these big sprites that are pieces of smaller pieces of bigger things to allow you to do that kind of stuff, and they just reused it in interesting ways.
And they end up looking like the skeletons you hang on the back of your door for Halloween, right? Where they're jointed with those attachments, paper attachment things, right?
Brads or whatever,
exactly.
Yeah, we were talking about that too, and I definitely wanted to comment on that, not even just for the bosses, but there's various humanoid enemies that are larger than a typical sprite, but and it's probably, when people play the game before, they probably notice this or sort of subconsciously realize that there were differences there, but the humanoids, especially like the knight characters, have this kind of marionette feel to them.
Herky-jerky,
and Brett was saying sort of from a joint-based animation system, so to speak, but it allowed them, like if they wanted an enemy that's bigger than Alucard, then they would have to just scale up the sprite, and then it would get pixelated and wouldn't look as sharp and crisp. And so their solution, obviously, was to make it, make a character out of multiple sprites, so it could actually talk or walk and bend its knees and things like that, bend its arms. But it gave this kind of cool but silly sort of effect of them kind of trundling.
I wonder
through
if
the
that's
hallway.
Also a Harryhausen effect that they're happy to have, right?
Yeah.
Because it definitely reminds me of.
I think it's fine. It feels like they're like animated suits of armor, right, or something, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of cool. But it was a detail that I was impressed with, because a lot of games would just like, we're just going to scale it up and just deal with the lack of clarity, but. And in fact, there's some cases where I feel like even Nintendo had done that in some of the Mario games, where they just would scale them up for effect. But I think it was just neat to have this sort of like, especially with like Beelzebub and Legion and stuff like that, where these big sprites and you're slowly whittling this thing down, and then
and you get that as part of that for free. Basically, is that because it's made of multiple things, you can independently move those things and separate them. In the case of those two in particular, which is nice.
You incorporate it into the gameplay, because you have it. So that's a good marriage of gameplay and tech there, right?
For sure.
Of like, okay, what can we, now that we know we can,
and
do
art
this. Direction
to maintain consistent pixel density, which is hugely important for for believability. Basically, that was a thing that I think. We didn't talk about it much, I don't think, at the time, but God of War was a thing that they did really well, especially in the later games where enemies were even larger. that they had you were climbing up Gaia or something
Right.
like that, and
Titans.
and the Titans. They managed to make that look just all the same pixel density. It was just like, how did they do this? Like,
Yeah.
and it's really just really good, smart art direction and very careful planning of like how you're going to spend your budget. But I mean, they do it really well here, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, in some very restricted hardware, right? I mean, you're only talking 2 megs of memory, you know, so
Right. Yeah, and the other topic we had talked about was we haven't talked about it too much, I don't think, but not to forget to mention the point that this was on a CD-ROM. Even though it's a 2D game, sprite-based game, and like the screenshot test, you could say, oh, this is in the same ilk of 4, of Super
Right.
Metroid,
Sure.
Super Castlevania 4. However, there are certain things they do, not only just the obvious stuff like the three-dimensional aspects, like some of the backgrounds are 3D and they have effects that are in 3D and things like that. The save room, as Alex even mentioned, there's a bit of a call out in the show about that. But because it's on CD-ROM, so there are some. We noted there are some intentional streaming moments with those halls that I thought were related to actually swapping CDs or something, but it's just a streaming hall that happens to say CD and have a picture of a CD over it, but Brett claims it's Castle Dracula reference.
It just nicely fits that it's Castle Dracula.
Does. But things like the music, as I think one of the most obvious examples to me, having played 4 right before this, right, which is your traditional, you know, retro MIDI. Yep.
Yeah.
And then
you have both, but yeah.
Yeah, but then you play this. Oh, both music and voice, I would say.
Yeah, right.
But then you play this, and the music is astounding. Like, I don't know if there's an background music area that I didn't like. I feel like everyone had its place. I'm sure there were some were better than others. The cathedral area specifically was one that I loved. I feel like it was just really well placed, and every time I went in there, it's just great. But the fidelity of the music, the amount of it, you know, that's one of the big advantages of being on a CD-ROM. I assume, right?
Yeah, you have Red Book audio, and you can just play it. I believe, certainly PlayStation 2 allowed this, but you could just use it as a CD player. Yeah, they don't. Right. The PlayStation 3 no longer supports that, unless I guess those original backwards compatible ones probably do. But originally you could just toss that, and same thing with the Xbox for that matter. So it was kind of a selling point that you could, you know, rip your music onto your Xbox 360 and have your own background soundtrack for games and things like that. Right. But yeah, I mean, you get that Red Book audio for free, you know, and we made use of that on our games in that era. Right. Starfighter was also on a CD, so even though it was a DVD-ROM compatible device, we used CD.
Okay, right. I didn't
because it was small enough. The game fit.
Cheaper to
make.
To do that. Yeah. Are there other things that this game was allowed to do? Like, so because of those streaming halls, you obviously see the hitch of the sort of load, quote unquote load.
Yeah, you see it also before the big bosses.
And the big bosses, yeah. So that was essentially fitting. They're streaming that off of the disc at that point, essentially, to put it in. Yeah,
I mean, I think they are all the time, but there's more stuff in those rooms, right? There's bigger changes, right? And they know you're going to go into that room with an effect, a video effect, basically, because there's always a CD-ROM, a stream room before you go to the teleport rooms, the keyholes, right. And I think it's because there's a big effect that happens there when you teleport, maybe,
which is a cool effect.
Yeah, it's not something you're going to see all the time, and etc. So and then so I mean, those sorts of tricks are things you always have to worry about. It's like, if I'm only going to see a thing once, how am I going to get it into memory, and how am I going to get rid of it? You know, when is that going to happen? You know, for us in PS2 era, that was our cutscenes, pre-rendered cutscenes, because at the time the player took up like 10 meg of memory so it could decompress stuff quickly enough to stream video from the DVD, and we had to make sure we had 10 megabytes of memory somewhere, so we had to throw away everything that was in that. Was such a pain in the neck to do that stuff.
Memory management.
Yeah, the memory management was, and we couldn't leave anything behind because we needed a big 10 megabyte chunk. Yeah, and you couldn't just save that. You had because we needed that for gameplay, right? I mean, it's just so it was a mess, and I'm sure they had the same problems here. On a much grander scale when you're talking about 2 megabytes.
Well, yeah, and I think like from a world design and level design perspective, to your point, like they have that limitation, and they're designing levels essentially that have to fit within 2 streaming halls, right? So it's like there's a limitation to how much you're going to be able to do, how large they are, how many items I guess there would be, enemies, and so that's just I think it's sort of, I feel like it's a thing that's sort of taken for granted, when we go back and play these old games, or anybody does, or they remember playing them when they were a kid. Right. It's like there's a lot of work that goes into squeezing all of that into between 2 streaming hallways. Yes. And it's like, oh yeah, I love that level and these enemies and all that, that kind of stuff. It's like, that's as much as they could do. Right. But they perfected a way to do it. Yeah, and they have in some places they have variants. So they can do more things, like the zombie hallway, which has 2 types of zombies, I think, in it. Yeah. They're basically palette swaps. And then the skeletons who throw the bouncing bits, the jack-o'-bones, have 2 different colors as well. And they have a slightly different way they throw things. They have one throws it kind of straighter, and one kind of throws it up, and it bounces up. So they just have a palette swap. They have a palette swap and slight behavior differences. Yeah. This was also a time when you could overlay code, which means you could actually slot in different code. You could modify the program basically on the fly. Wow. So you could actually potentially load in different behavior. I'm not sure if that's what they did. That would be to have to talk to an engineer from the day to be like, how did you fit all this stuff in for some of those things? Because a lot of the behaviors are similar, but they're different enough that I wonder. Yeah. But it might be just, play animation, and the animation has data in it that tells you, and then there's some projectiles. And that might be all they really do. It's hard to know. Yeah. It's hard to know that stuff. I mean, it's a little bit slightly related to that from a memory standpoint. The other thing that I think we kept putting on our notes as topics that we never hit, the character animation itself on Alucard. Alucard. The way she says it stood out to me right away. Like it's it's especially coming from 4, right, where we're playing a whole different generation. And I don't know this to be sure. I don't know this for sure, but I'm sure it is one of the games that was one of the bigger influences on that style, because, and I referenced Dead Cells as a kind of a modern example of like amazingly fluid and well-tuned and precise character animations. And here, like, his animations are astounding. Not even just his run. Right, like it's got a lot more frames. Obviously, when he lands, he'll actually lean forward as he starts to run, and then he'll stand up a little straighter. Or when he goes backwards the other direction, around. He doesn't turn around right away. He kind of moves backwards with his back, and then turns. Right. So there's all this extra subtlety and the ghosting. The ghosting. It's just, and his leap, and then there's a couple like sub moves, like you can leap and then jump down quickly. Right. There's sort of a little bit like a little bit more advanced moves, not the special power stuff that some of the items give you, but just regular moves. Right. But all of that stuff is just fluid, and obviously they spent a lot of frames on it. Yeah, that's what I mean. There's the extra frames that they added in there. You look at something like Super Mario World, and Mario's turn is, he has 3 maybe states. Yeah, there's physics involved where he does the same sort of skidding and turning and all that stuff, but he essentially has 3 or 4 frames of actual difference. Yeah, he's on one foot and he's turning and whatever, and I can sort of picture it in my head. I'd have to really look at it to break down how many frames exactly, but that was a huge deal, right? That's artists were probably salivating when they saw this game, right? Yeah. Late in the cycle, about the middle of the cycle, right? Because it's for 2000. PS1, I guess, for PS2, right? So, so it's pushing some of the boundaries there, but I think another example for some of the realization for me with the frame stuff is late in the game when we have so much defense and we're so powerful that taking damage isn't that big of a deal. it almost became more important to not get hit because of the hit animation.
Right, sure.
Because essentially it's a stun.
Because that blocks you, stun.
Right? So it's like...
You don't want to get stun locked.
Yeah. So it's like...
Yeah, dealing with the Medusas, it wasn't the damage they were going to do. It was, I'm trying to do those 4 gears, and they keep bumping me, and I'm...
Yeah, you get interrupted, and you get chain stunned, and all that kind of stuff. And so... I think that's just an example of like how the animation set actually is part of the gameplay here.
Yeah.
And some people would, there definitely sometimes are. There's 2 camps in this whole topic.
Right. Yeah.
Right. There's I want super responsive. When I press a direction, I want it to instantly do what I said. But then there's the other camp, which I think we bring up Dark Souls obviously all the time. There's some of the Dark Souls stuff going on there when it comes to frame counting and dodging and
when are you invincible?
Safe,
aren't you?
Invincible
safe
rule.
Frames, invincible frames.
And so there's like that's the modern version of some of that stuff. But back here it's like he has some of those extra frames because of the stylization. So it's almost sort of part of the pacing of the combat, and you have to kind of account for that.
Yeah.
While some people might say it's sluggish or I hate getting interrupted or whatever, it's like getting interrupted is part of the gameplay. Yeah. Well, it's not just It's not just did I take damage or not.
Right, yeah.
It's did I dodge them entirely or whatever.
I'm still no good at the Medusas.
No,
I don't know how many hours I've now played. I mean,
12,
more than 12 in my save, almost 13 in my save. So that probably means 20.
Yeah. I think you called it in a previous episode where it's the sine wave aspect of it or whatever, right? Where there's got to be some psychological effect of that movement.
Yeah,
it's probably a torture method in some way, where because you see them coming and you're
strap me to a chair, put duct tape around my head, force me to look at the Medusas bobbling around.
Because you look at them and you start panicking.
Yeah,
because you're like, oh, do I jump now? Do I hit now? When do I? Because they're a nightmare. And then you throw the stone. Obviously we get the armor eventually where that's not a problem, but when they can turn you to stone, and that's even worse. I don't know. It's just there's almost too much to talk about with this game.
Yeah.
Let alone we didn't even hit like the secrets and Alex mentioned it, but just there's so many extra things in the game.
Yeah.
And the Metroid, I was skeptical starting this game that because I'm such a Metroid fan, and that was sort of my core Metroidvania franchise, that that Castlevania had earned the Vania part of the genre term of Metroidvania, but I now am eating crow and no longer like it's. I
mean, it's really its own thing too.
It is.
I've seen people recently even complain about the terminology,
the merger.
Yeah, just don't. Just they're two different things. Don't even
That's fair.
And I think that is fair, especially having played it. I mean, for me, it was just like okay, it's whatever. There's similar styles, etc. But there is enough different here, and you've kind of pointed a lot to the sort of variability in your potential experience here versus Metroid. I mean, Metroid, you're going to go and you're going to get all the same things in the same order. You can't level anything. It's you just. Does she even level? She just gets beefed
suits.
up. Yeah, you get suits and things like that. But it's not like they change
tanks. You get your tanks and stuff. Yeah,
you get abilities.
It's similar to Zelda, right? And that you get more hearts or whatever, right? But that's
You get that's right.
That's
the tanks and the missiles and stuff.
Yeah. But that's the limit of sort of the RPG quote unquote ness of it. And this, I just completely flabbergasted and caught off guard of how much RPG is in this. Stats, right? Like even up arrows and down arrows for like hovering over, like straight Diablo stuff of like, which obviously was later. I guess
no,
Diablo was earlier. And so interesting legacy questions there. But you're hovering over a sword or a shield or something, and it's like, is this going to give me more or less? Right? You don't have to do the number crunching yourself. You just look, is the arrow going up or down? Right? Like, would never have thought that would be in this game, right? That kind of concept.
Yeah, that's true. But even then, you're making choices that are like, well, maybe I want to carry a shield instead.
Totally. No, and it's still it's a choice. Like you said, it's a choice, right? There was a whole couple hours where I just used the nunchucks.
Yeah.
And I was just like, because they have double hits, and I just wanted to fool around with them. Yeah. There's that big two-handed sword that I forget the name of it, but thrusts forward. It does a lot of damage, like a lot. But it limits what you can do with it. So it's like good against bosses and stuff. But it only like and it has a really long range as a sword, but it only thrusts forward.
Right.
So you can't even hit like candles and stuff because it doesn't hit down or anything.
Right.
So
Right.
So it's like limited use, but to think to yourself, okay, I want to go use this thing now.
Yeah. Plus all the shields with the shield rod.
Yeah.
I was saying I was going to go back and look at that stuff, but. There's so much game. I mean, it's just
yeah, you mentioned that, and I forgot all about it.
You can basically do a different effect with every shield, with the shield rod.
What?
Yeah, I know. It's just
and the augmentation, like the shield that gives you hearts back,
right?
And then even like things
then things we didn't even do. Neither one of us used spells really at all.
Yeah, and some of the necklaces and stuff that like have different effects that. Yeah, I can't believe it.
Yeah, it's immense.
It's an amazing game.
Yeah, it's a hard game to imagine having left for 20 years.
Yeah, we suck. We totally.
Yeah. Well, you suck.
Okay. Yeah. I admit it.
Yeah.
I am completely off base that I've not played this game before, and stubborn and regret that decision I made to move into the 3D era too quickly.
Just leave it.
It was all
behind.
about Tomb Raider and Metal Gear for me. I was like,
right.
This is the future. Well, the Metal Gear was the next year, but 98, I think, right?
I guess.
Pretty sure. Yeah. Anyway, it's a good one.
It is.
It's amazing. I'm glad we played it. And to be honest, I'm really actually glad we played 4 as well.
Yeah.
Because I think the comparison is pretty important.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah.
Because I feel like the jump to Symphony was even bigger for us because we did those back to back.
Yeah.
Because like, what's all the fuss? 4 is just it's just a platformer brawler, without any Metroidvania aspects to it. And then this is such a no pun intended, night or day difference.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even have a whip other than Richter,
Right.
And so, that's what I was going to mention about the animations. We jumped over to
the new game
Game Plus where you can play as Richter, and his animations are terrible compared to Alucard. So you can see a good difference of the kind of before and after there.
Yeah. All right, let's take a quick break.
Okay.
Come back, do some takeaways and some feedback.
Sounds good.
Welcome back from the break. We're here talking about Castlevania Symphony of the Night, following on from our Super Castlevania 4 discussion. And so we have a lot of game stuff to talk about as far as takeaways.
Oh yeah, we didn't do one for 4?
Right, because we were just going to wrap it into this one.
Oh shoot, I forgot about that.
Well, that's partly why my first one is about the theming.
Yeah.
Right, is that the gothic theming of the series is not all that usual, which is kind of funny to me because it feels so natural.
Yeah.
Especially playing it as much as we have over the last month and a half or whatever. 2 months, I guess. It's been a while. We've been playing for a while. It lends itself naturally to this stuff. There's a lot of variety, and it also fits the aesthetic of video games, which are outsized, right? I mean, Hal Barwood always used to say that video games are Hawaiian shirts or something like that, right? I don't remember exactly how he said it, but he'd say they're not subtle, right? Well, video games are Hawaiian shirts; they're not meant to be subtle.
That's funny.
And between the melodrama, and a lot of that carries through into other decisions that are made about the game. But I love the theming of this series, and I mean, that's partly me because when I was growing up, I watched a lot of horror, creature double features, and things like that. And,
Universal Monsters,
UHF, Universal Monsters, but also the Vincent Price stuff or whatever, all the Edgar Allan Poe adaptations, from that British horror, production company, etc. So. all that stuff's in my wheelhouse, or because it was in my wheelhouse when I was young, and so I just love that stuff, and I'm glad to play a game like this as a result.
Yeah. That was one of our takeaways, I think, for Devil May Cry as well, right? Was it because some of the gothic theming there? I'm pretty sure.
Maybe, yeah, could well be. Certainly, because
it's one of the only
place,
other of this era that really leaned so heavily into it.
Yeah,
obviously since then, plenty, but these games probably were the ones that really pushed hard on it. Yeah, it's a good one. Yeah, the castle and Dracula being the villain and the ever-present, ever-forever villain.
Right.
Yeah.
It's evergreen. He's going to come back every 100 years or 90 years or whatever it is.
Yeah. It also gets, I don't know, well, I don't know if I'll ever make it to some of the more modern ones to see how they deal with that stuff, but it definitely takes a lot of the guesswork out of who's your villain and how is it going to play out.
Right.
You set up a prophecy and you don't have to worry about it after that. So,
although you also wonder, like, how far can they go before they have to...
What?
Well, they have to not go to the future, right? They can't, right? It's
just
it's
gothic.
The 15th century or something, in this one. And it's like, well, if he comes every 90 years, then...
It's timeless.
Yeah, maybe he just switches.
In Transylvania, it's always gothic.
It's always 15th century in Transylvania.
They didn't get guns.
Yeah, never.
So, I mean, I actually had forgotten about that we had to cover 4 as well. So my first one actually isn't specifically to 4, but because 4, from a structure standpoint, was pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
And wasn't Metroid structure, as we talked about. Yeah. But the RPG aspect of Symphony of the Night is what I wanted to, one of my main big takeaways of how elaborate, how astounded I am that it is so elaborate.
Yeah.
And for this game, which, as you said earlier, people sort of sometimes say, well, they're very different games, Metroid and Castlevania, so they kind of shouldn't be talked about in the same breath. And I kind of agree now because, as you said too, because the variability of the RPG aspects of it really just changed things up so much.
Yeah.
I just had no idea. And like I said earlier, with Metroid being a more tightly wound kind of clock and really just very polished in that way, when you get a thing, an ability, a weapon, or whatever in Metroid, there's sort of a more, not instantaneous, but there's a more obvious answer to what you're going to do with it and why you need it. And here, you're getting things all the time. Some of them could be it could be a potion, it could be a really cool sword, it could be an armor, and so the equations are just completely different.
Yeah.
And you're just thinking to yourself, what do I do with this?
Yeah.
Or should I use this? Should I not? And that's
it's almost too big in that regard, because if you miss things, when you go back, you're not gonna, like, I was, when I was retreading my steps, getting from 180% to 200%.
Mm-hmm.
I was finding all kinds of things. Like, oh well, I'm not going to use this now. I already have the best sword.
Too late,
right?
Yep. Yep.
So that's also a risk.
It is. Yeah. I mean, it's that's a risk with any nonlinear game, right?
Yeah.
So that's the age-old debate and argument that people have of like, well, you don't want the player to miss stuff. Well, actually, you do. Yeah. You want the structure to be that way so the player feels more engaged and more invested and more ownership. If it's linear, they don't have,
I wonder, and I don't know if anybody's ever done this, but to take some of the secret finding and like build in the fact that you're going to find him out of order, and just sometimes give you something better when you get to a secret, even though it's later.
You mean programmatically
swap in things? Yeah. I mean, I feel like people have probably done that.
Yeah,
but I don't know of any. So off the top of my head, maybe folks can write in. Like, if you find this early in the game, you get this thing. But if you find it later in the game, maybe every third thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just get the old thing, but sometimes it's like, oh, I found this thing late, and I could have found it earlier, but now I get a cool thing.
Almost like loot or something.
Yeah,
right?
almost like loot based,
like
but
loot
more deliberate.
Yeah. You're making the linearity out of what you're finding.
Yeah, a little bit more. Yeah.
I know there's examples on the tip of my tongue.
Yeah.
By the way, we didn't even mention, speaking of loot, enemies will drop weapons.
Yeah, that's true.
Sometimes, right?
And armor and
different things.
Yeah.
So it's like that's another thing.
Apparently there's a weapon that's really overpowered that I didn't even get.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that somebody mentioned in the stream.
Oh, wow.
Game breaking good. Like
a sword?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I don't know because I didn't find it, but It had some strange name, and I just was like,
I don't know if I'll
stick.
Go back to the game or not, but I'm trying to not look at guides. I still haven't looked at anything, so...
Once I got to 193 or 4%, I started looking because I was like, well, now I just want to know.
Yeah.
I'm so close. So.
Well, what's your next one?
I mean, it's kind of obvious to say, and I kind of have a couple here that tie into that. Like the exploration is an obvious thing, but there's so much just systemic exploration as well. It's like it's shot through this whole thing is marbled with exploration, right? So just in every aesthetic. I mean, you're exploring the space certainly, but you're exploring the weapons and what they can do, and maybe the spells if you want to try to do that stuff. I mean, there's a ton of stuff I didn't buy from the librarian, and I have no idea how many more spells are there. I don't know. I have 2.
Yeah, I have. There's 4 I know of.
Okay,
and I have 3, but I didn't.
But also exploring all the different sub-weapon types, exploring, just all the systems
combinations,
all the different ways. I'm going to use this weapon. You saw me using a fist weapon with a sword. And you're like, what are you doing that for? I was like, well, it turns out this does a lot of damage. It gets a lot of crits and stuff like that. So it's just you're like I said, you often won't use something that you find late, but you probably want to just out of curiosity. Like maybe there's some weird effect it has, like the shield rod with all the different shields that do weird things, or whatever. I didn't explore the familiar system all that much because by the time I started using one, it was pretty late in the game. So I'd forgotten kind of to use it, and somebody pointed it out on the stream, and I said, "Oh yeah, I should put one on," and I put on the demon. Randomly, like I didn't want it to be the fairy, and I'm like, okay, well, I guess this one. So there's a whole other area that I haven't explored, right? I mean, it's just
it's the sense of player agency for exploring the game in all sorts of different axes is crazy. I mean, it's just, especially with it not explicitly being an RPG where you have classes or something like that, right? It's a traditional JRPG or Western RPG, but you are doing a lot of the same sort of verbs from a player agency standpoint. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. So the exploration and the both in the physical space, but also in the gameplay space, is really kind of amazing to me.
Yeah. Another one that I had that is, I guess, as Brett said, potentially a theme throughout the series, but it wasn't in 4 either. So, I missed on that. But I'm just calling it kind of the big surprise, or just a big reversal, or a big event that happens. And obviously, that's And also, we didn't talk about this too much, but I guess last episode we did. It's coupled with the concept that you could get the credits.
Yeah.
Right, early, and so not only is the surprise there, but also you may completely miss that there is a surprise if you're not careful.
Right.
And we were joking in pre-show. It's like, I wonder if there's anyone out there listening. We definitely want to hear from you, but I wonder if there's anybody who didn't know the castle was upside down. Right. They just finished it back in '97 and then put the game down and was like, yeah, I got them. I saw the credits, and it's like, wait, there's literally the whole half of the game left.
Yeah.
But that is that's just such a big...
Yeah, finishing the game and finding out you're halfway through the game is kind of a big deal.
Yeah. And to be honest, now that I think about it, I don't know how I got this far without somebody spoiling it for me.
Yeah.
You spoiled it for me only when we were talking about how far to play.
Next. Yeah.
I didn't know it did that.
Yeah.
And Alex was obviously dancing around it in his mail too. It was like, the thing happens that changed my life as a player.
It's funny to me that you didn't know, because of course I did know.
You knew ahead of time before we started playing the game.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know how that. We spoil stuff for people for ourselves all the time, is because all of us play games. All of our friends, we all play.
We all play.
Classics.
We all talk about it. I often don't even care. I'm not a person who cares about spoilers all that much with games, especially.
Yeah.
Because narrative stuff in games normally isn't dense enough to.
Yeah, don't spoil things for me.
I won't.
I don't even want you to tell me how to do that other clock thing.
I'm not.
I'm gonna someday maybe.
Yeah.
I might figure it out.
Yeah, someday.
No,
I'm not. Yeah, that's not going to happen. But maybe.
So anyway, I think it just, as far as the cojones that they had for just going that far with a big surprise, I can see a end of Act 3 twist. Those are plenty of those around, right, or whatever. Yeah. But this is just a big one, and it's sort of like, I would say, from a legacy standpoint, which we talk a lot about on the podcast, it's one that other big reversals should be tested against.
Yeah.
Because it's so big. It's like, we want to do a big thing in the middle of our game.
It's also a big story twist too, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's a big gameplay twist. I mean, it's all tied together, you know, in a kind of amazing
It's related
way.
to the item that you get. Yeah. It's related to revealing Shaft as a character. We won't talk about Shaft very much, but yeah, no. Definitely some
Shaft.
Weird decisions there. Maybe they knew, maybe they didn't know, but
they had to have known about the 1975
I guess
blaxploitation classic.
Yeah. Anyway, so is there one next for you?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of these we have overlap, but the bosses are something we talked about a lot this time, and
that does apply to 4 as well.
Yeah. I mean, this is a thing that I didn't. It's funny, when I was playing the original Metal Gear Solid originally back in 99 or whatever, right? Not in the cast. The first time I played it, I think I might have stopped playing it. I did stop playing it.
Everybody does.
Well, and it was because I had mostly played more systemic games on the PC up to that point. Mm-hmm. And for me, and RPGs and things like that. And for me, I was like, is this one of those games with a lot of bosses? And I was like, that's not my thing, right? Because I was all into the systems and the systemic play. And, something like Thief that has a boss, but it's really just using the systems to deal with the boss was kind of my bread and butter. I love that stuff. And, of course, now I've been playing console games for 20 years, and I've changed my tune about that. But I remember back at that time, people were like, this might not be the game for you if you don't like bosses. That variant changes, because I hadn't played like Zelda games, right? I mean, that's all, and I love that stuff now.
Yeah.
But like you said, the boss design here is wonderful. It's challenging. It's highly varied. And then they, when they flip the castle upside down and they give you some of the bosses that you thought were basically unique.
Yeah,
and you run into them and they're just fodder. It's like a 3-hit fodder to get through.
You feel
you feel so powerful. It's like, oh my god, this was so hard, and especially with some of them being reused from 4. That's another thing I'm really glad that we played them back to back about.
Yep,
because they were really hard in 4 to beat. I don't know, whatever, Slogra or something like that. It was very hard. And then here, when you first see him, it's him and the flying with the gargoyle thing,
Gaidon or something.
Yeah, whatever its name is, and it's just like. So difficult. It was so difficult before, those two individually, and now they are together. And then later on, there's a bunch of them. There's a room with like 4 of those things, the flying ones, and one of them changes state to be red, or maybe 2 of them do.
So good.
But it's just, so then when I'm fighting the really challenging things like Galamoth, and it's like, oh man, I'm like way out there on what I can actually manage to do. I have to pull out all the stops. I have to use the items like crazy, and love it.
Yeah, and I think Galamoth as an example, or Legion, or Beelzebub, those are great examples of bosses that probably had big influences and had legacy throughout the industry. In that. We played Shadow of the Colossus on the cast too, right? And you have these larger than life, bosses that don't even fit on the screen,
right?
And you're fighting Galamoth, and it's so different compared to everything else you fought,
right?
Legion, I think, is another good example where I'm like, what is going on with this boss, right? You don't even understand it at first.
It's really hard.
Yeah, it's hard, and then the corpses are coming. It's like it's really clever and really well designed, but you can see those, like. I'm making this up, obviously, but a young Ueda playing Symphony of the Night, right? And then thinking, oh man, these bosses are amazing, and what would a game be like if it were only bosses?
Sure.
So I'm making up a tall tale, but...
Yeah, because it wasn't that much longer to Eco.
Yeah, sure. Right. Fair enough.
He was making Eco when this game came out.
Fair enough.
Because that was going to be a PS1 game.
There's some young developer today...
Yeah, for sure. Maybe, what's his name for Dark Souls?
Yeah. Miyazaki,
right? Yeah. Would be a good example.
Or Alex Noisy.
Or for crying out loud.
No, he's our age. He was 97. He's not that young. I'm not getting him. Anyway, yeah, that bosses was one of mine as well.
Yeah.
Probably really my last one, to be honest. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I also mentioned, had in the list the sort of character weight and the commitment to movement. That when you do, for example, the gravity boot jump, the sort of jump,
which I didn't
jump
even
high, which you didn't
know about.
Well, I had help from the stream. I wouldn't have figured that out myself either. You commit to that. Right, I mean, that's what you're doing now. Yeah. It's different from Metroid, because in Metroid, when you do like the spin wall jump, you can spin away from the wall and come back, and like you have options. Like if something happens on the way, here it's no. This is what you're doing now. You've chosen to do this thing. That's what you're doing, and that's true of a lot. It's like once you've chosen to attack, you're attacking. You're not. You can't pull out of that. And I like that for a grounded location like this. I mean, I think it works for Metroid. Because it's a science fiction environment, like we talked about. It's not familiar, and it's a familiar space in a sense, right? I mean, we probably all haven't been to castles, but I mean, we've all seen them in these movies like Hammer Horror or whatever. So
yeah, it's more grounded. Yeah,
it's very grounded, and so why not have a character who's grounded? And that just is another way those things fit together. So.
Well, and I think it's a game with style as well, right? And he as a character, the way it's animated, the way the combat works, the way that frames are important.
Yeah.
That goes with that style, right?
Is it really? It's kind of an in-house style too, right? Because Metal Gear's this way, and Contra's this way. We played a little Contra briefly this week.
Goodness!
Oh my! Wow! Yeah, we played the one that's on the SNES Classic, and it was rough.
Couldn't get past. I don't think we didn't even.
We
get past
the first boss.
I didn't even get to the first boss.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. It's true. I think it is one of their things. I feel like Capcom and Konami were sort of always going at it, to some degree, when you have like the Mega Man on the other side or whatever, which taking a different tact on this.
Or Devil May Cry.
Or Devil May Cry, yeah. So, yeah, no, I think it's true. I think for me, it's just that one example of when you go the other direction.
Yeah.
It's just that one animation where he doesn't just turn around.
Yeah.
He actually goes backwards for a couple frames.
Yeah, he glides back. And
then glides into switching directions. It's so amazing. Yeah, it's so good.
And you see it a lot. I mean, one of the things that's really nice about that one in particular is that it's very natural to see that when you save. Right? I mean, that's when I think I probably even first noticed it, is because you're immediately kind of going back to the other direction, and you're facing one way, and you like start backing towards the direction you're going to go now, and then you flip around as you go, and and we have all that ghosted imagery as well to add fluidity, or it's almost like motion smoothing or something like that, or motion blur. Yeah,
it's just, that's a good point. I didn't think about that. I kind of thought to myself, like, why are they putting? It makes him feel kind of a little more otherworldly and cool, but it's like motion blur.
It is, yeah. It's like a very primitive blur,
pixel based motion blur.
Blur. Yeah,
cool.
Yeah, because that's something that the hardware the hardware has a lot of stuff that it can do in the PS1 on an image base, but you can't do it sort of on a character base. It's more full screen effects and things like that they built into the hardware.
Too early, yeah.
Yeah, you see a lot of that in Final Fantasy transitions and things like that. Like to go to the battle screen, you have that weird, like everything runs down the screen. Right. Like when you die in this is the same thing. It's one of those.
Yeah, full screen effects.
Yeah, full screen effects.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway.
Cool.
Yeah, great series. Glad we played a couple games from it, even though we didn't finish Super Castlevania 4.
We got to Dracula.
We did. And I guess he just stuck around for the...
We didn't beat him that time.
So he composed his symphony.
Yeah, exactly. That's why he's in this one.
That's right. It's because we let him be. It's us. We made that choice.
Thank goodness Alucard came back.
Thank goodness.
Came around.
Alucard.
I guess back. Yeah.
Alucard.
Oh, jeez.
Anyway. All right, well, I guess before we talk, there's probably two things we should talk about before we go to feedback. One is that we're going to do a bonus episode.
Yes.
For Blood, we're going to play Bloodstained, which is Igarashi. Is it Igarashi?
Yeah.
His most recent game.
Igarashi.
Yeah. That was Kickstartered.
Yep.
And finally came out a couple months ago. It was part of the occasion why we're playing this was that part of it was the big Castlevania anniversary collection.
They happened to nicely coincide.
Yeah.
I wonder if he planned that, but But no, it got
Sis
delayed.
was very delayed.
Got
So I'm not
delayed,
sure. I'm not sure that was planned. I think that just is a happy accident, as it were. So we're going to play that next week. We'll talk about how much, but we'll play as much.
Bonus
as we play.
episode, so we'll be a little more flexible. Yeah,
play what we play. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was we're talking about maybe having a little meetup here at the end of the month for people who are in town for PAX. We probably wouldn't be able to do it like the 30th, but we've talked about the 28th and the 29th as possibilities. So I don't know, maybe tag us on Twitter or shoot us email and say, hey, I'd be around, if you're in the area and you're hearing this and you'd be willing to come out and meet us somewhere central in Seattle. For that. So
we're close to the city. We can pop in.
We can pop in, and it'd be fun to meet people in person because we don't get an opportunity to do that.
No.
And it'd be nice. It'd theme with us recording in person this month. So that would be a lot of fun. That'd be great if we could do that. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But if it does, that'd be great. So just hit us on Twitter. Say, hey, I'd love to see you guys on the 28th or 29th or whatever, and or you can send email. And if we have enough interest, we'll do it. And if it's like there's one person, then probably we'll just say, well, thanks, but it probably won't work out. But we'll see. So let us know.
Yep, good call out. You mentioned.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure I mentioned it. I almost added it last week as like a before the episode.
Yeah,
a little stinger or something.
PSA.
But, it's a little buried in here, so maybe I'll still put that out on Twitter tomorrow or Wednesday when this comes out. Okay, let's turn finally to feedback. We have a lot of feedback, as we've been talking about with this series in particular, so we're just going to do a few emails because we're already at getting on close to an hour and a half, or probably an hour and 15.
Are we really?
Yeah.
Boy.
Yeah. So maybe we'll only do 2.
I think we should do a full.
Well, next, if we're going to do Bloodstained.
After Bloodstained, maybe we do a full.
Yeah, if we still have a lot.
Because we're here in person, so we could
really
wrap
riff for a while.
Yeah,
that's true. That's fair. Yeah, maybe we'll just do 2 tonight, and then try to do that to catch up this month. So you have the first one. This is email sent to devgameclub@gmail.com. We didn't have any singing reviews this time. I'm kind of hoping we don't this month. What with you being right here, that might make me too.
I would just leave the room and I'll listen. No, I'll go around
from the bedroom.
I'll go around the corner and I'll just so you can't see me, but I'll listen. Okay. All right. So email 1, emulation gameplay differences from Warren Linam-Church. Linam-Church.
Yeah.
A recent question asked.
That's why I give it to you.
Okay. Yeah, you jerk. A recent question asked if there were differences between emulated games and playing them on the original hardware. For me, quality of life updates to some JRPGs I've played, for example, Final Fantasy IX, Chrono Trigger on iOS, such as auto attack and speed bumps, can trivialize them by making over-leveling and auto attack the most efficient way to get through the game. Playing on original hardware meant you had to pay attention to what was happening and learn the weaknesses of each enemy and strengths of your characters to advance efficiently. Obviously, you don't have to play that way, but it requires discipline, which reminds me of the discipline of not checking the internet for how to solve adventure puzzle games, which I maintained during playing Symphony of the Night.
Yeah.
Which I always love. I did that recently with something else, too.
Probably Myst.
Myst, yeah. Anyway, something else. It was Breath of the Wild. Totally tangent.
Right. Yes.
190 hours, and I didn't look at one guide. And I pretty much scoured that game. And I'm proud that I didn't look at one guide. So, yeah. I mean, I agree with him.
Yeah.
I think it's a really good point, and we are living in the age of you got to have discipline to avoid some of this stuff.
Yeah.
Because it's like Chrono Trigger on iOS is so accessible. It's like, I'll just get it on that. I have it. It's in my pocket, right?
And they've written an AI that'll play the game for you.
Yeah, you're not even
thinking. It has
thinking.
access to the data.
Yeah.
It's like,
exactly.
It's just like, this is weak to ice. We'll just use ice attack. Yeah.
It's actually, now that he mentions it, it's tragic.
It really is. I mean, it's
yeah. That's fair. I mean, is I guess it's slightly different than emulation, though, right? That's like those are
sure, but emulation on modern systems is allowing for things
yeah,
you
it's
wouldn't
true.
be able to do.
Save states
right,
and stuff.
exactly.
We exploited
we
that.
save states for Castlevania 4 for sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I didn't for the first couple episodes, and then like the third episode, I was like, okay, now.
Oh, you didn't at all? Okay.
No, I didn't at all up to that point, and then there came a point where it became quite difficult, and I had to, if I was going to get through it.
I mean, did we? Yeah, we definitely did not feel the pain of
what
that
people
game.
felt. Yeah,
yeah, and we can't speak intelligently about it because of that. But we also would not have finished.
No, I would have gotten
anywhere close to it for the podcast. So maybe we get a pass because the podcast requires us to keep moving forward, and we play a certain chunk every week, and we kind of need to kind of stay in the 4-week chunk if we can. Although we did maybe fewer for that one, but anyway, yeah, good email. So
yeah, and it's very common with the long games too. I mean, Final Fantasy 12 is an example that comes to mind that got a remaster recently, and they added the speed up button, like the 2x button or something like that. I don't know how it was mapped because of course my copy's still in the shrink wrap because me, but it does change the feel of a game when you do that, you know, and it also makes me like wonder about all the time I've spent on these games. Like maybe I should not play them when they come out and just wait until 10 years from now when they streamline the heck out of them.
Well, so I have a recent example for you that you can actually answer very uniquely. You're playing Dragon's Dogma right now.
I am.
On stream.
Yes, on the PS3.
And the new version
has
on
fast
Switch
travel.
has fast travel.
Right.
So what do you think, how would that be different for you? Are you missing fast travel, or do you think that there is something to...
So there are times I miss it. However, there are experiences I have in that game...
You told me that story.
You're right, that I would not have otherwise. And I was streaming one night, and I had to get out to some far-off outpost, the Western Wall or something like that. I forget what it's called. But I was trying to get to this remote location that I didn't even know where it was. But there was a place en route that I had been. So if you were able to fast travel, that's probably where I would have fast traveled to. Mm-hmm. But because it was so far... And because there's no fast travel, and because there's a day-night cycle, by the time I got out to new areas that I hadn't been, it started getting dark. And it's not a game where you can just pitch a tent and you're safe. You're
in danger.
You're just out there in danger, and there's more monsters at night. I mean, the game's very clear about that. And without the fast travel, I wouldn't have had this amazing session where I just managed to eke out with my life just by... running at the right times and like going back and reviving my whatever. And I mean it's not emulation specific because I guess that's been remastered or whatever, but that's the kind of emulating, but it's a change. Yeah, we're change in response to sort of the market.
We've
migrated often. Yeah, I mean,
well, his example was less emulation, I think, and sort of quality of life additions.
Right.
But in the case of Dragon's Dogma that you mentioned. You could have that experience, but you would have to have the discipline to choose to go out there. And Witcher 3 is another example where they have fast travel.
Right.
And, if you're trying to do a quest or something, you want to be the most efficient, so you're going to use it. But there were times when I did choose to not use it because I just wanted to go out and be a Witcher.
Right.
And just, ride my horse through the forest instead of just skipping it. But it was pretty rare because, I
only have so many hours.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And there are people who play Elder Scrolls games and try not to fast travel.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah,
that's always been a case where, and that's part of the reason why the games.
Wasn't Morrowind didn't have it, right? Or you got on the Striders or something.
You got on the Silt Striders, yeah.
So it was more. The experience was more kind of connected or cohesive because you never had that load screen.
Right, and for a lot of people, that's their favorite one.
I know.
As a result,
that's probably the one we'll have to play someday.
Yeah,
maybe. Anyway,
I don't know. It's a hard one to play on the cast because it's like, well, what? Oh, so I went west. Oh, I went east.
Yeah, but can you imagine? It would be we wouldn't know what would happen.
That's very true. That's very true.
All right.
I certainly would not know what happened. I didn't play Morrowind.
Thank you, Warren.
Yes.
I didn't finish it.
Yeah.
As we know.
Yeah. I have one from Ashton Herman, Symphony of the Night and Spiritual Successors. Ashton's written it before. Hi, Tim and Brett. Despite owning a Sega Saturn as a kid, I didn't play Symphony of the Night until it launched on the Xbox 360 arcade. At the time, I remember reading that Microsoft had needed to increase their maximum file size for arcade games just to accommodate it, and that seemed to pave the way for other full-fledged classic and indie games down the line. In fact, one of those eventual games was Shadow Complex, an early indie Metroidvania by Chair Entertainment, who was acquired by Epic Games around the time. Shadow Complex was a wonderful gem of a game that really captured the spirit of the subgenre and heralded the coming storm of indie Metroidvanias, many of which, as Gothic Chocobo brought up on the last episode, several episodes ago now, have found success through crowdfunding. I was an early backer on Bloodstained, Ritual of the Night, but I made the mistake of switching my copy from a PC one to the Switch, and the port is sadly lacking from the other versions of the game. Yeah, I've heard that too. However, one Kickstarter-funded Metroidvania that far and away exceeded expectations, and one that I humbly submit you should consider checking out for a spin-off episode, is Hollow Knight. You've heard of Hollow Knight.
I haven't. It's on that Switch over there.
I could start it, but you're not here. I actually have it for the PS4.
What's more is, Hollow Knight also is spoken about in reference to Dark Souls as well.
Yes.
Because of the way that combat works.
Yeah,
I'm trying to get into it. I've played a fair amount, but I'm nowhere near where I think it gets really crazy.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So
I've heard a lot about that one, and it's been on my list for a while.
Yeah.
When you were discussing the crowdfunding market around nostalgic retellings of games, Tim brought up the interesting point that while gamers may be hoping for something that feels and plays exactly like the older games they loved, developers more often than not want to push the envelope. While games like Bloodstained and Time Spinner seem to more accurately recreate the feeling of Symphony of the Night, I think Hollow Knight is an example of a game that both builds upon the tropes of its predecessors and sets a new bar for the subgenre. I know both of you have worked on games that have built upon the legacies of beloved titles or series, Fallout, Tomb Raider, Halo, Gone Home, really the list goes on and on. So I'm curious about your personal experiences with those. Does a game's legacy or reputation encourage you or excite you? Does it add additional stress to the project? Do you maybe feel shackled by player expectations? Anyway, thanks for reading. Keep up the great work. Thank you, Ashton. It's a big topic. It's tough. It is tough working in... I mean, we started with Star Wars games, and we were shackled by the license to some degree. I say shackle. I mean, that's unkind, because we were able to do a fair amount with the games that we worked on together.
I think, ironically, thanks to Darren and Justin and Tadaishi and, with Dark Forces. Right? We talked about on the Dark Forces series of how they intentionally ended up going away from the main characters, right? So Dark Forces almost set a precedent for other Star Wars games to not have to be Luke Skywalker.
Right, but at the time, there was so much movie licensing tie-in games when that was a huge trend. Yeah. EA was making millions and millions of dollars off of licenses, like Lord of the Rings license and what have you at that time. And it was such a huge deal for the industry. It was something we were really struggling with as an industry, as licensed titles. Like the Bond series was one. There were just lots of them.
They were the
ones,
ones that did it the most.
Right. I mean, there's still... Godfather, even. Yeah. What a weird...
Well, yeah.
They kept pulling us back in.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Wasn't that Goodfellas? No.
Oh, that's
Godfather. Okay.
Part 3.
Okay, all right.
I tried to get out. They kept pulling me back in.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Good. All right. Yeah. It's getting late. He's going to start singing soon.
Yeah, before you know it.
All right.
Anyway, I don't know. I mean, it's exciting to play in those areas. I mean, it's exciting for us because I played Fallout. It was kind of cool to work on Fallout games.
Yeah.
And that's exciting, and you want to be true to that, and also try to take it in a different direction if you can. And in some cases you can, and in some cases you can't, because of player expectations or what have you. I mean, it's
Yep. Yeah.
Tim just nodding over there. Just gonna.
I have so much about this topic that I could say and want to say, and honesty that I want to have that I won't have on air. But Brett's right. It's the proverbial blessing and a curse.
Yeah.
In general, I mean, I've only worked with essentially established IPs my whole career.
Yeah, that's true.
And so I seek them out. I actually enjoy working with them and generally want to because I'm a fan. Like, I'm a fanboy myself. And so, like, working on Tomb Raider...
I wouldn't say boy anymore, but...
Okay. I try. Boy-ish. Anyway, so I really like living in those worlds, but they definitely have limitations and challenges that come in all sorts of manners that drive you mad sometimes.
Yeah.
And the fan expectation side is very tricky, especially with some of the extremely popular ones, because different fans want different things, right? So there's not even a consistent voice there.
Well, and that's true in the team itself. I mean, you're saying yourself as a fanboy. There's a lot of people working on these, titles that are
who are fans
themselves, and also are fans of different parts of it, right? So that's another stress that's internal. Like, somebody thinks this should be emphasized more from this version of the series versus this iteration of the series, or what have you. That was my favorite one. That was my favorite one, or whatever. Yeah. So
it's within the team, and it's just the thing that I enjoy, that I always strive to do, is to evolve whatever I'm working with if I can, right? And to give you a small example, and I won't get into too much because I don't want to speak for Crystal, but we intentionally chose to change the tone of Tomb Raider with the reboot, right? Yeah. That was a very intentional choice. There are some fans that didn't like that, right? Yeah. And it wasn't like the previous ones. It wasn't the Lara that everyone remembered. It was a different version, right? But that's a risk. It's hard to convince executives and others to do that kind of stuff, and change is really hard. Whenever you have an IP, you're generally afraid all the time,
right?
Because you don't want to mess it up. You don't want to do this, that. So it's really hard to get people to believe in taking that risk. Yeah. So that's the kind of the flip side. But generally, I would say it's a positive thing and experience. It's just. It's very complicated.
Yeah, and timing often factors in as well. Like, being able to do, Fallout 3 was pretty distant from Fallout 2 in terms of when it came out.
Yeah.
And another thing is, like, on a console transition is a good time to do something different, because you naturally have people who are just getting a system for the first time, and maybe you're grabbing those eyeballs. Yeah. I mean, I know the No Mutants Allowed crowd were not happy that Fallout 3 was a real time. First person, totally different, Bethesda style game, right? Yeah. I mean, that's not what they wanted at all. Yeah. They weren't a big enough market to support what they wanted, to be honest. At least not from a major publisher. Yeah. These days, I think that's more supportable. I mean, Wasteland 2 was sort of more in that vein, really. Not entirely, but closer.
That's what they're trying to come.
Right, that they're trying to reach that market, and there is room for that. The industry's gotten so big, and there's so many different niches and audiences and things like that. But at the time, it's like 10 years ago, 11 years ago now, Fallout 3, that was a risk.
Yeah.
We knew that we were losing the core audience, in some ways, in order to pursue that.
And I think it was.
I wasn't there for a lot of those decisions, but I know that was a concern.
It was good enough to pick up a bunch of new people, right? So it's like that's and that was a similar argument that we used for Tomb Raider as well, to some degree. So it's a blessing and a curse, and it's using Star Wars as an example is interesting, because most of the time we weren't making a game from a known sort of game genre. We were just using Star Wars as an IP,
sure,
right? But when you work with the Halo or Tomb Raider or something like that, there's a game legacy there,
right. Yeah,
that isn't just is it feel Star Warsy or not,
right.
So very rarely, like there's some like, was TIE Fighter enough like X-Wing or something like that, right? Yeah. Where if someone were
or was Starfighter enough like TIE Fighter?
right. So if someone were to make a new TIE Fighter today, there would be expectations.
Sure,
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But for whatever reason, there hasn't been that many of those situations in Star Wars. It's more of just using the IP and the kind of boundaries.
And bringing it to game genres. Yeah. And I think the games that were kind of least successful in terms of as games were the ones that were most tied to the movies often, to play the movie games, basically. And those were the strict license ones that matched like what EA was doing, right? But did not enjoy that kind of success, I don't think. At least critically. Like commercially, I don't know that I remember any of the numbers, but
Yeah.
You know, it's hard to say. You know, they
Yeah.
probably did fine, but
Yeah.
you know, because Star Wars would sell units no matter what we attached it to as far as games went.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, I mean, yeah, it's both. It's exciting because you're a fan, you know, but
it's maddening.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah. I'm trying to think if there's any stuff that I'm like would consider myself still a big fan of that I'd be like, I'd like to work on that. And I don't know if I'm really just in that.
You and I are pretty opposites in that. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like you're not really a fanboy
Of
like
stuff.
that.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
not really.
I mean,
I'm not. It's because of the lore, man. It's all that lore.
Films, like, I don't know. Is there a film filmmaker that you would be like,
franchise person? Yeah, you know what? Somebody hand me the Bergman license.
I was just gonna say that as a joke. So you probably would be like, yeah, let's.
Oh man, the Science of God trilogy. I've got it.
That'll sell a lot.
It's all gonna be in Swedish.
There we go.
See. Yeah.
Because it's got to be pure to the franchise.
It gotta be true. Gotta be true.
No. Nobody give him that.
Yeah, don't give me that. I wouldn't know what to do with it. I'm not creative enough. All right, we've been going
you want to cut it?
at least an hour and a half. So yeah, we probably ought to call it there. And I think you're probably right. We can probably find some time later in the month to fit in a whole bunch of email at once.
Because the thing with our replies to emails is that we can just go on and on.
Yeah, we could.
We just babble about who knows what. In fact, I
would
don't even
get considered replies, and you would babble because I read the emails in advance.
Okay, yeah, I would babble, and I feel like half the time when we finish answering a question, we're not even anywhere near the topic that started on. But that's fine.
Yeah.
We're still in the ballpark, maybe, and people seem to be okay with it. So.
They do.
But I think we could probably do an hour's worth of that easily.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're probably right. We have at least another 10 emails just about Metroidvania stuff.
I wonder if there's a day where we won't be able to answer everything.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be when the genes kick in and we're both, losing our minds. If that hasn't started to happen already. Anyway, thank you, Ashton and Warren, for sending an email to devgameclub@gmail.com and everyone else, because there are quite a number of names here that I'm looking at. And we will get to you. We have it. I just haven't had... We have had these longer episodes because this game was a lot bigger than we anticipated.
Bonus episode next week, so maybe we can
we'll
knock some out there. Yeah.
And maybe catch the rest the week after that. Anyway... so next week we'll play some Bloodstained. Yeah. I'm going to play probably on PC. I guess you're going to play on Switch.
Oh yeah, or you can use my Switch if you want. But you don't want to play on Switch.
No, because the PC version is apparently superior.
Yeah.
So
I just love that Switch.
I know you do.
And also I want to play Symphony of the Night on my Switch, and I can't. So this is the next best thing.
Maybe someday.
Yeah. Oh, they got to be working on it.
I'm sure
with this anniversary collection that came out, which is actually a pretty good collection.
Yeah,
pretty well done, I'd say. It's got to be laying the groundwork for.
Oh, I'm sure.
Who knows what Konami's doing though?
Yeah, sitting on these properties and not doing much with them.
It's very weird.
It is very weird. It's very weird. Anyway, thank you all for joining us and for sending in your thoughts. Again, remember to reach out to us via email or Twitter about meeting up late in the month, if that's a thing that you could do while we're both out here in the Seattle area. But until then, I will bid you a good night.
Good night.